Hey, amazing viewers. I love connecting with all of you from around the world. Stay with me until the end, because this story is packed with surprises that will leave you inspired and thinking differently. Today's twist is something no one saw coming, and if it's your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Show some love by liking the video, and don't forget to share it with your friends. The moment Ileana Brooks stepped through the gleaming golden doors of the Sterling Grand Hotel, she felt a shift in the air, a weightless pause that seemed to suspend time itself. New York's skyline glittered in the distance, yet the luxury of the hotel, a symbol of wealth and exclusivity, suddenly felt distant, almost foreign. Ileana, freshly returned from an elite year abroad, was no stranger to the world of high society, yet something felt wrong. The opulence of the hotel, with its towering marble columns and sparkling crystal chandeliers, held no comfort. The air, heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes and polished wood, seemed thick with unspoken judgments. As she moved through the lobby, she noticed the subtle but unmistakable hesitation in the staff's gestures, the way their eyes lingered a little too long, their smiles strained, as though questioning her right to be there. The doorman, who had greeted every other guest with a slight bow, stepped aside for her without so much as a word. The bellhops, whose hands were poised to assist, made no effort to help with her luggage. She could feel their gazes on her, dissecting her appearance, and she knew exactly why. Her skin color. It wasn't the first time she had encountered such looks. From high-end stores in Paris to gala events in London, she had become accustomed to being treated differently. But this was different. This was her mother's hotel, the Sterling Grand, a place where Ileana had spent time growing up, a place that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of class. Yet here she was, being treated as if she were invisible. She stood tall, feeling the weight of their stares, but she didn't falter. Her mother, Victoria Brooks, one of the most powerful women in the global hotel industry, had built this empire from the ground up, and Ileana wasn't about to let the prejudice of a few staff members define her experience. She approached the front desk with the confidence that had always come from knowing who she was and where she came from, only to be met by Amanda Reeves, the shift manager, whose polite smile faltered as soon as their eyes met. Ileana knew that something was off. Amanda's gaze narrowed when she said her name, Brooks, and a flicker of recognition passed through her eyes. But instead of warmth, there was a trace of something else, something Ileana couldn't quite place. The tension in the air thickened, and as Amanda fumbled with her phone, delaying the check-in process with every keystroke, Ileana's patience began to wear thin. She wasn't just a guest, she was a person with a rightful place in this world, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel otherwise. The receptionist, in her neatly tailored uniform, was deliberately stalling, as though looking for a reason to deny her presence at the hotel. It wasn't just a delay, it was a test to see if Ileana would shrink, if she would back down, if she would conform to the narrow expectations of people like Amanda. But Ileana wasn't going to play that game. She could feel the game unfolding, the undercurrent of bias, but she refused to let it define her. She stood her ground, calm and composed, her eyes steady on Amanda, who was pretending to search for something on her computer, but wasn't really looking at all. In that moment, Ileana knew this was more than just a check-in process. It was a challenge to her identity, to her place in the world, and to the power dynamics that so often sought to keep her in her place. But she wasn't about to back down. She was Ileana Brooks, and this was her mother's hotel. Ileana's heart pounded in her chest, but her exterior remained unflinching as Amanda continued to tap away at her keyboard, her fingers stiff, almost robotic. The lobby buzzed around them, guests chatting in hushed tones, the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor. But in that moment, it felt as though the whole world had receded into the background. It was just her and Amanda. The tension between them thickened with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Amanda looked up, her gaze stiff and uncomfortable. I'm afraid we can't process your check-in just yet, Ms. Brooks, Amanda said, her voice tight. The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. There seems to be some issue with your reservation. Ileana's brow furrowed. Her reservation. There was no possible way. Her mother, Victoria Brooks, had personally arranged this visit. Everything had been confirmed months ago, from the room to the amenities. Ileana knew the system here better than anyone. I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Ileana replied, her voice measured but laced with an undercurrent of disbelief. The reservation was confirmed, and the payment was processed. Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm aware, but the system shows a discrepancy. She slid her phone towards Ileana, showing the screen with a cryptic, half-loaded message. It's not something I can resolve on my own. I'll need to escalate it to the manager. The unspoken truth hit Ileana like a wave. Escalate it to the manager. A polite phrase that, in this context, was nothing more than a thinly veiled delay tactic. Amanda was hoping for Ileana to lose her composure, to get frustrated, to reveal some crack in the polished armor she'd spent years building. But Ileana had learned long ago that when the world demanded compliance, the only way to survive was to hold steady. She stared at the screen, then slowly lifted her eyes to meet Amanda's. I think I'll speak to the manager myself, Ileana said. There was no threat in her tone, just quiet certainty. She wasn't going to let Amanda waste her time. Before Amanda could respond, Ileana turned on her heel and made her way toward the grand staircase that led to the manager's office. The staff parted in front of her like a river splitting before a ship, but there was no warmth in their motions. The whispers followed her, though she chose to ignore them, focusing on the rhythmic echo of her heels against the polished marble. She reached the second floor, where the corridors were lined with intricate paintings of past hotel guests, people of old money, heirs and heiresses, aristocrats from generations gone by. Ileana had often marveled at how the portraits never seemed to change, how they remained frozen in time, trapped in an image of who they used to be, rather than who they actually were. As she walked past the smiling faces, she couldn't help but wonder how many of them had been her ancestors too. How many had faced the same judgment, the same small, subtle acts of exclusion, simply because they didn't fit the narrow image of who was worthy to be here. At the manager's office, she knocked twice before entering without waiting for a response. Behind a massive wooden desk, the manager, Gerald Hawthorne, looked up from his paperwork, his expression unreadable. Ileana, he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed, as though he'd been expecting her. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with salt and pepper hair that had been carefully styled to perfection. But his eyes, cold and calculating, gave him away. What can I do for you? I'd like you to explain to me why my reservation is being held hostage by your staff, Ileana said, her tone calm but unyielding, and why your receptionist is going out of her way to create problems where none exist. Gerald's smile faltered for just a moment before it returned, more strained than before. He stood slowly, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning Ileana as though she were an object to be examined. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, he said, the words floating in the air like a paper-thin excuse. Amanda is a good employee, but perhaps she misunderstood something. Ileana was done with niceties. This isn't about a misunderstanding, Gerald. I know exactly what's happening here, and I won't let it slide. There's no mistake. You know exactly who I am. She stepped closer to his desk, the words falling from her lips with an icy clarity that seemed to freeze the room. This isn't about a system error. This is about something else. Something that your staff clearly has an issue with. For the first time, Gerald's mask of politeness slipped, just a fraction, enough for Ileana to see the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. We don't need to escalate this further, he said, though his words were less convincing now. He gestured to the door behind him. I'll have your room prepared immediately. I apologize for any confusion. But Ileana didn't move. Apologies won't fix this, Gerald. This is about more than just a room. It's about respect. And until I get that, I'm not going anywhere." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Gerald's eyes locked with hers, and for the first time in their interaction, he seemed to be truly seeing her, not as the heir to an empire, not as a guest, but as a person who demanded acknowledgement. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he gave a small nod. "Of course," he said, his voice carrying an unspoken promise. "You'll have it." And just like that, the battle began, not just for a room at the Sterling Grand, but for something far more precious: Ileana's place in a world that had long sought to push her to the margins. The elevator doors closed behind Ileana with a soft whoosh, but the weight of the moment lingered in her chest. She stared at her reflection in the polished mirror of the elevator as it ascended, distant but steady. The woman staring back at her was a figure she barely recognized, shaped by years of navigating a world that constantly tested her resilience. A world where her presence, her bloodline, her every move was scrutinized. But the reflection was also her own, an unyielding force that refused to bend in the face of adversity. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the top floor, and Ileana stepped out, the doors closing behind her with a sense of finality. She was here for a reason, and no amount of pomp or pretense could erase that fact. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a problem to be managed. She was a force, a woman who had built herself not from privilege, but from the grit and resolve of someone who had been told no far too many times. Walking toward her room, Ileana felt something stir inside her, a feeling that had long been buried. It wasn't just defiance anymore. It was power, the quiet, steady understanding that nothing could stand in her way unless she allowed it. The elite hotel, the pristine reputation, the generations of bloodlines and old money, they were all just illusions. An illusion of control, an illusion of status. The truth, Ileana realized, was far more powerful. Those who are truly powerful never have to prove their worth. They simply exist. As she unlocked the door to her suite, the faintest whisper of a thought passed through her mind. Maybe this wasn't about the reservation at all. Maybe it was a lesson, a reminder. A reminder that power wasn't about wealth or title. It was about identity. It was about knowing your value, regardless of what the world thought of you. It was about walking into any room with the undeniable confidence that you belonged there, no matter how much they tried to convince you otherwise. She stepped into the suite and closed the door behind her with a soft click. The city lights outside her window flickered below, 1,000 stories unfolding in the shadows, and for the first time that day, Ileana allowed herself to smile. The world outside would keep turning. The status quo would fight to maintain its grip. But Ileana knew something they didn't. Power doesn't belong to the few. It belongs to those who refuse to accept the illusion that it's out of reach. As the city hummed softly beneath her, Ileana sat by the window, the evening air cool against her skin. She knew this was just the beginning. Her fight wasn't with a hotel, nor with any individual. It was with a system, a mindset that had long tried to silence voices like hers. And now she wasn't just a participant in the world's game. She was rewriting the rules. Her story was no longer about just overcoming obstacles. It was about creating opportunities, about turning the tables. And she was ready. She wasn't just taking what she was given. She was taking what was rightfully hers, unapologetically, and with a sense of quiet revolution. Because sometimes the greatest battle is not the one you fight on the outside. It's the one you fight within yourself, choosing to live your truth, even when the world tries to drown it out. Ileana had chosen hers, and with that, she knew one thing for certain. The world was about to see her, and they would have no choice but to acknowledge her place in it.